Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are looking at another update 1.87 Devblog, and it's time to have a look at the Type 1936A. But before we do that, I do have another shout out to make. There is a squadron which is looking for players in War Thunder. It is called YTube or YTUBE, and they specialize in pretty much everything. They're just looking for people to join so they can do the new squadron stuff, which is going to be coming out after update 1.87. And so check them out. The only requirement that they have is a rank 5 in planes and tanks, so therefore you can play all of the stuff with them. Anyway, let's get into this devblog. The Type 1936A Mob is a very heavily armed destroyer. It is, I believe, the first 4.7 destroyer that we're going to see from the Germans, so therefore it is a step above, or at least seen as a step above the other destroyers. It was at least 4.7 on the dev server, and the reason is because of its main armament. It sits there with 5 150mm guns, 2 in a dual mounting on the front, and 3 in single mountings on the back. These guns are seen as light cruiser guns, at least in the game's context. If you have a look at the Kern or the Nürnberg, they have 150mm on them. They are slightly different to these ones, but the firepower idea is carried over. So because of that, this is seen as a very heavily armed destroyer. And it also has a bunch of other stuff on it. So it has 2 sets of torpedo tubes. If you want to have a look at them, they are sat in 4 stacks. And what I love about these torpedo tubes is they can't really get stuck on anything. So you should have a very nice free range of where you want to put your torpedoes. On top of this, when we look at the other weaponry, which is sat on this machine, there is a decent amount of stuff. So we can see here that the anti-aircraft armament, it's on par with its classmates and is represented by 2 semi-automatic double 37mm, 20mm autocannons, and 2 quadruple filings and 4 single flak 38s. So overall, its main armament is really good. Its secondaries are lacking against ships, I would say, but against planes should be able to deal with whatever is coming at them. It's got good torpedoes. It's on top of this got some interesting engines. If we have a look back up here. Here we go. So the Type 1936A Mob having a slightly worse top speed of 36 knots, 66.7 kilometers an hour compared to the regular Type 1936 is 71, but it's still up there. You know, it's a little bit slower, but the speed is okay. If we look at the Leningrad that just came out, that was at 80 kilometers an hour. So there is definitely an argument for it being a little bit slower, but the question is how much will that actually play a part? The question that is on my mind about this machine, and was on my mind on the dev server as well, is because it's the first 4.7, we are seeing the bridge between what is seen as a light cruiser and a destroyer, and it's this machine. And it seems to be that the bridge that they're making is down to the armament. Now, for me, the light cruiser is not powerful because it has larger armament than the destroyer. That is kind of just an extra factor that is thrown in, especially with stuff like the Krasny Cats. The issue is the armor, and always has been when we look at the light cruisers. The fact is, with a machine like this on the dev server, this did not have any armor apart from around its 150mm, and this means that you can HE it to death very effectively. And when it comes to a light cruiser, you are not able to do that. So the big difference for me between a destroyer and a light cruiser in game, at least when it comes to their power level, is their armor, which is why you see cruisers which don't have a ton of armor, they are seen as worse than the other cruisers. The guns are secondary in that regard. And even though, with that said, it doesn't mean that destroyers can't do damage to these light cruisers. It is much easier for a light cruiser to do damage to them. And this is one of the inherent issues for me when it comes to ships that we're running into. These style of destroyers do not match up well against light cruisers. The standard heavy cruiser does not line up well against the light cruiser, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a ton of different ship types that we've also seen that could come to the game around destroyers such as light frigates, and because there are so many destroyers in the game, the Type 1936A may not see a lot of light cruiser gameplay in the future. But looking at it right now, with the fact that they have just added a new light cruiser for each nation, people will want to grind it out, people will want to play it, the 1936A is going to be sat in a rough spot because I still find it very hard to find destroyers which would match up against their light cruiser counterparts. This one is probably the closest that we've come to, but it is still woefully bad in the survivability department. It has a lot less crew, it's a lot smaller, so therefore taking out key components is easier. It can be HE'd to death, and it doesn't matter that it has 3 150s on it. The other light cruisers have more, and if they don't have more, they do have more in terms of armor, so they can survive longer. And this is a problem I've been talking about from the start with ships. Battle boats do not do well against destroyers. Destroyers do not go well against light cruisers. Now, this is the test, though. So that is something I've been saying from the start, and that is something I still firmly believe, even with a ship like this, which is trying to bridge the gap. But what I will say is now, with this ship, now we have an opportunity to truly work out if it can be bridged. If this thing is useful against cruisers, if it can be used in a positive way against them. Because if it can't, then the theory holds. If it can, then there can be some wiggle room here, and it shows that we can put different classes of ship against each other and have fun. Just like you can do at low levels with patrol boats and battle boats, where, the battle boats have normally more weaponry on them, but the PT boats can finish them off with torpedoes. With these destroyers that are being added, it's kind of becoming the same scenario because of the torpedoes and the higher tier light cruisers not getting them, but at the same time, the biggest issue we're running into is the survivability aspect. A lot of people want to go bigger with ships. They want to see heavy cruisers. They want to see more frigates. They want to see more destroyers. And overall, yeah, sure, it would be nice to see. The problem I see is before we had the Sea Voyage event, it was very hard to get a top tier game in ships. On top of this, it is impossible for a destroyer to do well in a light cruiser match. And why don't people think this is going to be replicated at the higher level? Why is it not seen that these ideas breed whoever is bigger wins? And that is something that has been key to ships for a very long time. You have to be an absolute mug to struggle in a light cruiser against a destroyer. Especially with the new ones that are coming out, which are going to be higher BR, but they're still going to be in the BR range of this thing. And since this thing is going to go up a lot, because, we've talked about before how people want to use the best vehicles, so therefore they play the higher echelons to drag more people up, And because of that, are you willing to be in this ship when you could have already ground out a light cruiser as well? This is another thing to talk about. So the progression system in ships, I actually kind of like the idea. I think there are some RP costs which are a little bit crazy, but overall the vertical way of doing things instead of horizontal is kind of cool, because it means that getting to the higher echelons is faster for the individual, and we've seen that a lot in ships. It means that you can play other nations more, it means that you can play more ships, you can play more classes of ships, but the problem this leaves is when you have a destroyer line, which is now as long as the German line, a lot of people are going to look at that and they're just going to get as many destroyers as they need and then push on to the next thing, which is the light cruiser. And if you're making somebody research all of the destroyers in the first place to get to the light cruiser, then there is literally no point in this system. Because the whole point of the system when it was sold to us was that you could play different types of ships and you wouldn't have to, grind out all one type of a ship to get to the next one. Well, right now, that's exactly what's happening. So it would be nice to see some RP changes. It would be nice to see if we can ever get to a point where destroyers do well against light cruisers, or what can be done in that regard to make them on equal parts. I think one of the first things that we could do, especially with the Type 1936, is give it a decent stock shell that can actually penetrate light cruisers. Because light cruisers, with their stock shells, with their HE, they can annihilate this thing all day. But you cannot hurt a light cruiser unless it is not well armored in the Type 1936. I'm interested to see what happens with this thing. I would say I am pessimistic about it, just because everything that I've seen over the last year puts me towards thinking that this will not be a success. I would like it to be a success, though, because it means that it opens a lot of doors for Naval, which sound very, very appetizing. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.